Welcome back to the deep dive. We grab a stack of sources, extract the essential blueprints, and really show you what's going on beneath the surface. Today, we are undertaking a really critical deep dive into our internal architecture. We're focusing on those structures of self-doubt.
Yeah,
We are talking about, well, probably the most formidable prisons in the world, the ones built entirely inside our own minds.
that's a really powerful metaphor, and it frames the material we have for you perfectly, I think. We've synthesized sources that tell a really compelling story, focusing intensely on the psychological phenomenon of success and its dark shadow, feeling like a fraud.
Right. The imposter phenomenon.
Exactly, the imposter phenomenon, or IP, as it's often called.
Hmm.
And our central figure in this deep dive is a guy named Elias. He's a highly successful architect, really high functioning, but his entire external reality, these amazing, sleek, sustainable buildings he designed, prestigious prizes he won, it all stood in stark, almost, violent contradiction to his internal self-concept. It's quite the paradox. He built palaces for other people, essentially, while he was living in this kind of self-imposed psychological shack.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty crucial. We're going to unpack Elias's experience to understand the precise, sometimes quite technical mechanisms of the imposter phenomenon.
And we'll identify the specific, really actionable psychological tools that are used to break free. This involves a process rooted in cognitive restructuring.
Okay.
And maybe most importantly, we hope you gain some insight into how you can identify and, maybe revise your own internal blueprint, how you can draw a healthier structure for your reality.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Let's begin this construction project right away then and jump into section 1, the blueprint of self-doubt, where we really define this paradox. All right, so Elias's professional reality, as we said, was just, well, brilliant. Our sources paint this picture of an architect who is celebrated not just for how things looked, the aesthetics, but for this really profound technical and sustainable vision. He had a portfolio that was basically a testament to mastery, and it all culminated in him winning the prestigious Sterling Prize for this innovative museum design.
And we should stress, this wasn't just like a participation trophy.
No, not at all. We're not talking about just a pretty building. This design was specifically praised for its groundbreaking use of light management, spatial geometry, some really complex structural engineering. This takes, verifiable, immense skill.
Exactly. The Sterling Prize is about as objective a measure as you can get of elite competence in a really demanding field, one that's constantly under public scrutiny. But here's the profound disconnect, the thing that really defines IP. Our sources revealed that internally, for Elias winning this thing, it wasn't a cause for relief, certainly not celebration. It just triggered this new kind of low-grade, persistent hum of anxiety.
And, it's important to draw a line here. This isn't just standard humility, right? Lots of successful people are modest.
That's a crucial distinction.
But Elias's belief was different. It was this deeply ingrained schema, like a core pattern of thought, that just insisted his success was entirely down to external random forces.
Luck, maybe.
Yeah, luck, fortunate timing, or even he darkly called it a clerical error by the prize jury.
Wow. A clerical error.
Yeah. So he wasn't just being modest, he was genuinely, perpetually anticipating the moment he'd be exposed as the fraud he truly believed himself to be.
Okay, so to understand why he couldn't just enjoy the success, why he couldn't internalize it, we really need to dissect the mechanics of this self-invalidation. Elias suffered from what psychologists call a profoundly skewed attributional style.
Attributional style. Okay, what exactly is that?
It's basically the psychological framework we all use, often unconsciously, to explain the causes of events in our lives, both the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Okay, so how we explain why things happen to us, let's drill down into that, because the sources really clarify it's not just about externalizing success in general. It's a very specific pattern of explanation that really locks someone into the imposter phenomenon.
It is absolutely specific and incredibly destructive. Psychologists often talk about 4 quadrants in attribution. internal versus external, and stable versus unstable.
Right. Internal, external, stable, unstable.
And Elias's pattern was just rigid and toxic.
Okay, help us chart that out then. How did he handle success using this framework? Let's start there.
Okay, so when it came to success, any success, like the Sterling Prize, Elias attributed it to external, unstable factors.
External, unstable.
External means it came from outside himself.
Mm-hmm.
So the client was easy, or the weather conditions were perfect for construction, or maybe the jury was just tired and overlooked flaws. Unstable means it was temporary, a fluke, basically. It won't happen again.
Oh, okay.
So he would internally dismiss the Sterling Prize by thinking something like, well, the client didn't scrutinize the budget closely enough that's external, and that was just pure luck that won't hold up for the next project that's unstable.
I see. So the core takeaway for him was this success is fleeting and it has nothing to do with my actual ability.
Exactly. So he gets this massive public validation, this huge reward, but his mind just systematically refuses to update his core belief file about himself. He gives the credit to literally everything but his own competence.
Which renders the success psychologically meaningless for him.
Pretty much meaningless, yes. Now, look at the flip side, which is arguably far more insidious,
Yeah.
internalizing failure.
You okay?
Any minor setback, and we're talking really minor sometimes, like a supply chain delay, maybe a critical comment from a junior engineer, or a slight budget overrun, that was immediately attributed to internal stable factors.
Okay, so internal and stable. The opposite pattern.
The exact opposite. Internal means it stemmed directly from his own character or ability, his lack of foresight, his fundamental incompetence, and stable means it's permanent. This is just how he is. It will always be this way.
Wow. So if he missed, say, a minor deadline, he wouldn't think, oh, that supplier really messed up, bad luck.
Right.
He'd think, I missed the deadline because I am fundamentally incapable of managing projects, and this proves I'm flawed, and I'll always be flawed.
That is precisely the pattern. The failure becomes damning proof of the deep-seated, stable incompetence he already suspected was true.
So this rigid, asymmetrical attributional style, that's like the engine driving the imposter phenomenon.
It's the engine, absolutely. It guarantees that any positive evidence, any success, is constantly invalidated, just dismissed, while any negative evidence, even tiny setbacks, is constantly reinforced as proof of his core deficiency. It's a perfect trap.
That dynamic, it must create just intense psychological pain. The sources talk about severe cognitive dissonance. That clash between the external reality and his internal perception must have been deafening.
Oh, the clash is violent. Cognitive dissonance is that awful psychological tension we feel when we hold two conflicting beliefs at the same time. For Elias, you had the entire architectural world shouting, "You are brilliant, here's the Sterling Prize."
Yeah.
While his internal self-concept, his core belief was just screaming back, "You're a total fraud, you're fooling everyone."
And the mind has to resolve that tension somehow, right? You can't just live indefinitely with that level of internal conflict.
Exactly. And this is where that destructive feedback loop really solidifies. Often, the quickest, maybe even the most comfortable path for the brain, weirdly, is to maintain the established narrative, the one it knows.
Even if it's negative.
Even if it's negative. So instead of doing the really hard, painful, self-concept challenging work of updating his belief to something like, okay, maybe I am actually competent, Elias's mind consistently chose the easier route. Invalidate the praise. He rationalized away all the external evidence, the prize, the glowing client reviews, everything that contradicted his internal story.
Effectively trapping himself, his thoughts literally became the bars of his own self-imposed prison.
Yeah. He probably knew the layout of his perceived flaws better than the layout of his latest award-winning museum design.
So his mind was actively working against his own, verifiable reality, just constantly undermining him. Okay, now we move into section 2, where Elias's story takes this really fascinating, maybe counterintuitive turn. Instead of leading to relief, or maybe even a little bit of confidence, the Sterling Prize actually became an accelerant. It acted as a catalyst for crisis.
Yeah, that's a crucial psychological nuance of the imposter phenomenon that our sources really highlight well. For many IP sufferers, success doesn't actually dissipate the doubt. It functions more like like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's a dose of high-octane
How
pressure.
so?
It just raises the stakes. It raises the perceived ceiling for the impending, inevitable exposure they believe is lurking just around the corner. The thinking goes, the higher I climb, the farther I have to fall when they finally figure me out.
Right, makes sense in a scary way.
Hmm.
And the stakes were raised monumentally for Elias. Immediately after the prize, he was offered the commission of a lifetime, designing the new National Arts Library. Yeah, this wasn't just another building. This was a national, monumental legacy project. It basically magnified the social pressure, the environmental scrutiny, the personal pressure tenfold.
And under that kind of intensified scrutiny, Elias's already rigid cognitive distortions just went into maladaptive overdrive.
Maladaptive overdrive, meaning
Well, when the pressure is really on, we often revert back to our most entrenched, most unhelpful thought patterns, our sort of default negative settings.
Okay, let's detail the specific destructive thought patterns he exhibited. The first one, and maybe the most paralyzing, is catastrophic thinking.
Right. Catastrophic thinking is when you immediately leap to the worst possible conclusion, often one that's wildly disproportionate to the actual situation. For Elias, with the library project, this meant believing that failure on any tiny aspect, a minor budgeting error, a small structural delay, wouldn't just mean a project setback. No, it would mean the total annihilation of his entire career.
Wow.
He literally feared headlines like "Fraud Exposed," "Sterling Prize Winner's Career Revealed as a Sham."
So it's never just, oops, I made a mistake. It's always, this mistake proves I am fundamentally worthless and everything I've ever done is invalid. It's a total zero-sum game.
Exactly. Anything less than absolute perfection equals total irrecoverable disaster in his mind.
And that fear of annihilation, that must have fueled the second distortion you mentioned. Mind reading.
It did. Elias became pathologically convinced that everyone around him, his colleagues, the new library clients, even the construction crew hammering away, were constantly whispering about his inadequacies.
He thought they could see right through him.
He was certain they saw the fraudulence he felt internally. He believed they were just waiting, almost patiently, for the moment they could validate their suspicions and say, "See, we knew it."
So he was essentially projecting his own internal critic onto every single face he encountered, turning every neutral glance, every normal question into this kind of suspicious interrogation in his head.
Which naturally led to devastating behavioral consequences,
Yeah.
specifically avoidance and isolation.
How did that play out?
Well, the sheer fear of failure, which was spurred on by those catastrophic thoughts, resulted in creative paralysis. The sources describe him just staring at the blank drafting paper for hours on end, unable to even execute the initial concepts for the library.
But why? I mean, intellectually, he knew how to design a building. He just won a massive prize for it. What was stopping him from just starting?
The imposter phenomenon forces this terrible gap between expectation and perceived reality. He felt utterly incapable of replicating what his mind kept insisting was just lucky past success. Every line he drew on that paper felt like it would become a piece of verifiable evidence. And since he believed the inevitable outcome was guaranteed failure and public exposure, the safest, most logical step for his anxious mind was, well, avoid generating any evidence at all. Don't draw the line.
Wow. That terror then drove him to retreat, didn't it? Leading to serious professional isolation.
Crucially, yes, he started pushing his own team away. When they genuinely offered collaboration, suggesting new design software, offering to maybe split up the initial conceptual sketches to get things moving, he completely misinterpreted their intentions.
How did he see it?
Instead of seeing helpful partnership, his IP-fueled mind twisted these offers into proof. Proof that they had seen his stalled work, recognized his incompetence, and now felt the need to step in and intervene to save the project from him.
So his own narrative was so powerful, it reframed genuine support as negative confirmation of his deepest fears.
Absolutely. So he trapped himself in this impossible situation where accepting help would confirm his failure in his own mind, but refusing help basically guaranteed his paralysis. He was truly, utterly isolated right there at the peak of his supposed success.
So here is Elias, paralyzed, isolated, the massive library commission stalled. He's staring at a blank sheet of paper. which is really just a metaphor for his mind at that point, right?
Yeah, completely blocked.
This self-imposed prison clearly needed some kind of intervention, and it came, as our sources detail, from a really unexpected, almost quiet place.
It did. And the sources highlight this pivotal moment beautifully because it illustrates how the right kind of external data, the right kind of feedback, can sometimes bypass those strong IP defenses. The shift didn't come from some grand epiphany, or a stern talking to from the CEO. It came from a quiet interaction with a young intern named Clara.
Okay, and the detail in the sources about Clara's feedback seems absolutely essential here. She wasn't praising the flashy end result, wow, that award-winning museum is amazing.
No, not at all.
She was praising something very different, a dense, highly technical piece of work Elias had written years earlier. It was about structural integrity in cantilevered designs and tensile stress calculations.
Things he himself had long since dismissed as just, rudimentary, just basic engineering data, he probably thought.
Right. So why was this praise effective when the global recognition of the Sterling Prize wasn't? Why did the huge prize just bounce off him? But this comment about an old technical paper actually landed with impact.
This is really the nucleus of the breakthrough.
Mm,
Clara's praise was hyper-specific. It was focused entirely on his process and his technical knowledge, not on subjective things like flair or luck.
okay.
And she didn't just say, nice paper. She revealed that she had read his paper multiple times and that his methodical breakdown of those complex stress calculations was the direct reason she had chosen to specialize in structural engineering herself.
Wow. Okay. So it connected his work directly to a positive, tangible outcome in someone else's professional life.
Exactly. Now, think back to the attributional style, the Sterling Prize. That's easily attributed by Elias to external, unstable factors, timing, jury politics, subjective taste. He could dismiss it. But the paper, that dealt with objective facts. Mathematics, physics, engineering principles, structural integrity. Elias simply could not attribute the clarity and accuracy of his stress calculations to the client being easy or good timing or luck.
It didn't fit the old narrative.
It didn't fit. It was objective, external evidence of enduring, stable, internal competence. Competence rooted in knowledge.
So it was like an anomaly, a piece of data that his fraud narrative couldn't instantly absorb and invalidate like it usually did. It was too specific, too rooted in verifiable logic.
Precisely. Our sources describe this specific social feedback as an anomaly because it literally broke his established attributional style for a moment. It acted like a chisel against the wall of his self-imposed prison. It created the first genuine crack in that armor of self-doubt. The evidence was just irrefutable.
Okay, so this crack appears. What cognitive shift did that force in Elias? What happened next?
It forced him into a state of, well, let's call it forced neutral observation. That same evening, apparently driven by Clara's objective, specific praise, he actually went back and revisited his own technical paper.
He read his own work.
Yes, and for the first time in potentially years, he was compelled to look at his own work almost as if it were written by a neutral third-party expert. He had to analyze the logic, evaluate the careful reasoning, recognize the deep expertise demonstrated in those calculations, the elegant problem-solving.
So he had to step outside of himself, essentially, become his own objective critic, seeing the evidence clearly, distance for a moment from that internal critic that was constantly just screaming obscenities at him.
Exactly. And that distance, that forced objectivity, led to the essential breakthrough realization, the core shift in his internal script. It wasn't luck. It was knowledge.
It wasn't luck, it was knowledge.
That simple realization is the foundation upon which he could finally begin to tear down the old, faulty blueprint and start drafting a new one. He was forced by that specific, undeniable piece of external data to confront and accept the objective evidence of his own deep, stable competence.
Okay, so the interaction with Clara, that was the spark, the ignition, maybe. But real lasting change required more than just a single moment. It required systematic, effortful psychological work. That single event triggered cognitive restructuring.
Right.
And that's the formal psychological process of change that allowed him to actually, use that new realization to build on it.
Exactly. This is where we shift from just understanding the problem, the architecture of doubt, to defining the tools for rebuilding. Cognitive restructuring is a foundational evidence-based technique used primarily in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBD.
And we really need to understand its core goal. It teaches individuals how to first identify, then challenge, and finally reframe those irrational or unhelpful thoughts. And it's all based on the core principle that thoughts are not facts. Just because you think it doesn't make it true.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. Thoughts are not facts. So if Elias's internal dialogue, those negative thoughts, were the faulty blueprint for his self-doubt, then cognitive restructuring is essentially the set of tools he used to draw a new, more accurate, evidence-based blueprint.
That's a perfect analogy.
So let's talk about how the practice actually works in detail. It's not just wishful thinking, right? There's a method.
Oh, absolutely. For the listener, maybe the most common practical application of cognitive restructuring is often taught as a three-step process. Sometimes people do it using a written journal, maybe a three-column method on paper. The goal is to move from the feeling, the automatic thought, to the actual facts. Elias had to learn to do this actively, consciously.
Okay, break down the 3 steps for us and maybe apply them directly to Elias's ongoing struggle with the huge library project. How did he use this?
All right. Step 1, identification of the automatic negative thought, ANT. These ANTs, they just pop into your head, right? So as Elias began actually designing the library, maybe triggered by a challenging question from a client, an old ANT would inevitably creep back in. The thought is instantaneous, feels very real, highly emotional. I must have miscalculated the initial structural needs for this section. I'm going to be exposed as incompetent this week. Just like that.
Okay, that's the immediate, emotional, probably irrational thought. What's step 2?
Step 2, challenging the thought with evidence. This is where Elias had to learn to interrogate that thought like a prosecuting attorney questioning a shaky witness. He had to ask himself, what is the specific evidence supporting this catastrophic claim?
And the answer would likely be?
Often the answer is none. It's just an assumption, a feeling, a fear. Then he asks the counter question, what is the evidence contradicting this claim? And here he could draw on facts. Well, I used the industry standard calculation software. My initial structural draft was peer-reviewed by the lead engineer on the team. And hey, my technical paper on cantilevered stress, the one Clara mentioned, is objectively sound and demonstrates my core knowledge.
So he's actively dismantling the foundation of that catastrophic thought. He's using real-world data, objective facts, almost like he would double-check a structural load calculation in his day job.
Precisely. He is forcing the emotionally charged, often vague negative thought to confront cold, hard, objective reality. It's like shining a bright light on it.
Okay. And that leads to step 3.
Step 3. Reframe the thought into a balanced, realistic response. The goal here isn't toxic positivity, it's balance. The balanced response acknowledges the real pressure of the situation, but grounds the self in demonstrable competence. So instead of just accepting the original ANT, I'm going to be exposed, Elias would practice reframing it. He'd practice saying something like, okay, this project is high pressure, that's true, but I have years of relevant experience and my technical knowledge base, which has been validated by colleagues like Clara, is solid. Even if a challenge does arise, which happens in complex projects, I have the knowledge base in the team to address it effectively.
That's really powerful. It's not, as you said, forced optimism, everything's perfect. It's evidence-based self-talk. It's replacing that internal aggression and panic with reasoned analysis, using the actual evidence gathered from Clara's comment and his own forced neutral observation of his past work.
And look, this internal shift, it's hard work. It required him to actively seek out formal support. Our sources mention Elias sought out a therapist who specialized in CBT. The therapist helped him systematically identify and map out all his deeply entrenched cognitive distortions. The catastrophic thinking, sure, but also maybe polarized thinking, seeing things as only black or white, success or failure, mind reading, overgeneralization. The whole dysfunctional architecture of his doubt.
So therapy gave him the language, the concepts, and the structured framework to really fight back against those thoughts effectively.
Yes. But the internal change also manifested externally in a really crucial way: his leadership style. The sources specifically note that he started delegating tasks much more effectively, instead of trying to personally control every single rivet and calculation himself.
Okay, why was delegation so central to overcoming the imposter phenomenon? It seems counterintuitive. Maybe wouldn't relying on others make him feel less in control?
But the imposter phenomenon is deeply, deeply tied to perfectionism and control. The imposter often believes they must be the solo act waiting to be booed. They assume that if they rely on anyone else, any eventual failure will inevitably be traced back to them. But crucially, they won't have the intimate hands-on knowledge of every single detail needed to fix the mistake quickly and maintain the illusion of competence. So they feel they have to execute every task flawlessly and often secretly.
I see. So delegation completely shatters that requirement. It forces him to transition from being this fearful, isolated expert trying to do everything to being a responsible, trusting leader.
It signals a massive fundamental change in his self-concept. He moved from that impossible burden of trying to personally execute every single detail, which is literally impossible for a project the scale of the National Arts Library, to accepting his real role,
Which was?
which was being the leader who designs robust systems, hires capable people, sets the vision, and then trusts their combined process to deliver. This shift, moving from fear-driven micromanagement to trust-driven collaboration, was concrete proof that his new internal blueprint was becoming robust, that it was actually taking shape in the real world.
He realized the team's combined knowledge was the real asset, not just his own isolated, frantic, and ultimately unsustainable brilliance.
Exactly. That's a huge step.
Okay, so as we start to synthesize the primary psychological lessons from Elias's whole journey here, the first foundational takeaway seems to be perhaps the most profound one. That critical distinction between perception versus reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This lesson is just stark when you look at Elias's story. His suffering, it was intense, it was painful, it was entirely real, no question. But its source was ultimately a distorted internal narrative, not an objective lack of skill or competence.
Right. The core issue wasn't actually incompetence. It was a fundamental malfunction in his cognitive attribution system, how he explained things to himself.
His perception of reality, the firmly held belief I am incompetent, was objectively contradicted by his entire resume, by the Sterling Prize, by everything. But his internal feelings, his thoughts, were stronger and more convincing to him than the actual facts.
It's such a powerful reminder for all of us, I think, that the emotional intensity of a thought, how real it feels, doesn't actually equate to its factual accuracy.
Not at all.
We have to learn to kind of hold those intense automatic feelings of inadequacy, those ANTs we talked about, at arm's length sometimes, examine them, question them, rather than just automatically accepting them as gospel truth.
And that realization leads directly into the next core idea: resilience as an acquired skill. This is so important. The sources really emphasize that Elias didn't just suddenly wake up one morning cured of self-doubt. Poof, it's gone.
No magic wand.
No magic wand. His resilience, his ability to manage the doubt, it wasn't some innate personality trait he was just born with, or that the prize somehow bestowed upon him. It was a skill he painstakingly acquired, brick by brick, thought by systematic restructured thought. It was hard, conscious work using specific psychological tools.
That reframing is incredibly useful, I think, because it validates the struggle. It tells you, the listener, that if you feel you lack resilience in certain areas, maybe it just means you haven't finished building that structure yet. You haven't finished drafting and implementing the revised blueprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It normalizes the fact that mental toughness or resilience isn't some mystical gift. It's an outcome of effort, of practice, just like learning any other complex skill.
And a crucial part of that construction process, as we saw so clearly with Clara, was the power of specific social support, specific being the key word.
Yes. While therapy provided the intellectual framework, the CBT tools, it was Clara's unsolicited, very specific feedback that provided the initial undeniable leverage point, the crack in the wall.
Let's just reiterate why that specificity matters so much as an antidote to IP. Why wasn't general praise like, Elias, you're brilliant, the museum is beautiful, enough to make a dent?
Because, again, general praise is just too easily filed away under those external unstable attributions in the IP sufferer's mind. Elias could easily dismiss beautiful as just subjective taste, or maybe the person saying it was just being nice or didn't know enough to judge properly.
Right, easy to invalidate.
Very easy.
Yeah.
But when Clara praised the specifics of the structural integrity calculations in his old paper, she was praising objective, verifiable competence. She was pointing directly to internal, stable facts about his knowledge and skill.
Got it.
Genuine specific feedback acts as this incredibly powerful therapeutic agent because it grounds someone in an objective reality that they're currently unable to see clearly through their own severe self-invalidating bias.
So the takeaway for anyone listening, if you are trying to support someone you suspect might be struggling with imposter phenomenon, maybe resist the urge to just say, you're amazing. Instead, try to praise the specific process they used, or the technical knowledge they demonstrated, or maybe the sheer effort you saw them put in that led to the positive result. That gives them concrete, objective data their biased mind can't easily refute or dismiss.
It bypasses the ego's well-practiced defenses against general praise, and it hits them right where the actual evidence resides. It's much harder to argue with facts about calculations than with opinions about beauty.
Makes perfect sense. And finally, we have to ask, what was the fate of the National Arts Library? And maybe more importantly, what was the fate of Elias's internal architecture? Did he fully conquer the doubt?
Well, Elias did successfully design and oversee the construction of the National Arts Library.
Yeah.
It was by all accounts a major success and really cemented his professional legacy.
Okay, good.
But, and this is crucial, the sources are meticulous in noting the reality of recovery from something like chronic IP. It was not a flawless, completely anxiety-free process going forward. It wasn't like flipping a switch.
The old doubts didn't just vanish forever.
No. They did creep back in sometimes, especially under pressure. However, he learned, through therapy and practice, to distinguish them. They were no longer the permanent residents of his mind, dictating the entire construction schedule of his life. They were now just visitors.
Visitors, not permanent residents. I like that.
Yeah. It implies they show up, maybe hang around for a bit,
Yeah.
but they don't own the place anymore.
So that seems like the ultimate, maybe more relatable psychological goal, doesn't it? It's not necessarily about achieving complete silence in the mind, which might be unrealistic for many people. It's about gaining control.
Exactly. He learned to observe the doubt when it arose, recognizing it almost like an artifact, a remnant of an old, fearful blueprint without automatically allowing it to seize control of the construction site of his present life and career.
He could acknowledge the visitor, maybe even nod hello, but he didn't hand over the keys to the house anymore.
Precisely. He was finally able, more often than not, to hold both the pencil and the eraser. He could make continuous, rational revisions to the architecture of his self-concept based on current evidence, rather than letting those old, fear-driven lines dictate his final structure forever. #outro.
Elias's journey, as we've distilled it from this source material, it's really a phenomenal illustration, I think, of the fundamental human capacity for cognitive change, for rewriting our own stories. We often focus so much on external transformations, new jobs, new houses, whatever, but maybe the most important and truly lasting changes happen internally through that often painstaking process of self-analysis, of challenging our thoughts, of cognitive restructuring.
It's so true. We really are the architects of our internal worlds, aren't we? Our past experiences, they might have laid a pretty challenging foundation for some of us. Maybe a foundation of anxiety or self-doubt, maybe even a solid concrete slab of the imposter phenomenon like Elias had. But the key takeaway is that the blueprints are never final. Elias proved that resilience isn't just something you have or don't have. It's something you build, consciously, deliberately, sometimes painstakingly, thought by thought, over time. It truly is an acquired skill, and it's available to everyone who's willing to pick up those psychological tools and do the work.
So the sources really leave us with a critical, maybe provocative question to reflect upon. And this is for you, the listener, as you look at your own professional world or maybe even your personal life. How many of your own perceived limitations, those internal walls you feel you keep hitting, the ceilings you think you absolutely can't break through, how many of those are not actually impenetrable objective barriers out there in the world, but merely lines on an outdated blueprint inside your own head? Lines that you, through self-knowledge, through active cognitive effort, might actually have the power to erase and redraw.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Maybe take a moment today or this week to consider what specific pieces of objective evidence for your own competence, your own skills, your own knowledge might you be currently overlooking or habitually dismissing. Was there a time, maybe recently, maybe years ago, when someone gave you highly specific, verifiable praise for your process or your technical skill or your dedication like Gerva did for Elias? Was there an objective achievement, big or small, that you instantly dismissed as, oh, that was easy, or I just got lucky?
Go back and look at it again.
Go back and perform that force-neutral observation we talked about. Try to assess that piece of work, that achievement, that feedback, as if it came from a stranger you respect. That specific piece of evidence, however small it seems, it just might be the chisel you need to start cracking the armor of your own self-imposed prison.
That's it for this deep dive. We really hope this exploration into the architecture of doubt leaves you feeling a bit more equipped, maybe a bit more empowered to look at your own internal structure differently.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll talk to you next time.